This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper. T.S. Eliot. I'm reading from Compound, a book by S.A. Bodine. Prologue. T.S. Eliot was wrong. My world ended with a bang the minute we entered the compound and that silver door closed behind us. The sound was brutal. Final. An echoing, resounding boom that slashed my 9-year-old heart in two. My fists beat on the door. I bawled. The screaming left me hoarse and my feet hurt. Through my tears, the bear and elk on my father's shirt swam together. Beneath the chamois, Dad's chest heaved. The previous 40 minutes had left us out of breath. Finally, my gaze focused and went beyond him, searching. I gulped down a painful sob. Had everyone made it? Farther down the corridor, I saw my weeping mother, dressed in burgundy robe, dark tendrils dangling from her once careful braid. Mom clutched my 6-year-old sister, Therese, a sobbing, pigtailed lump in pink flowered flannel. From one small hand dangled her beloved Winnie the Pooh. Behind them stomped my 11-year-old sister Lexi, dark-haired mussed, arms crossed over the front of her blue silk pajamas. Not being Brother of the Year material, I almost didn't care if she made it or not. But my grandmother wasn't in sight. "Where's Gram?" I shouted. Dad patted my head hard and steady like I was a dog. He spoke slowly in the same tone he had used to explain to the household help the exact amount of starch he required in his shirts. "Eli, listen to me. There wasn't enough time. I waited as long as I could. It was imperative I get the rest of you to safety. We had to shut the door before it was too late." The door, always the door. Another look. No sign of my twin brother. He was the person I needed the most. Where was he? My pounding heart suggested I already knew the answer. "Eddie!" His name caught in my throat, stuck tight by the panic rising up from my belly. Dad whirled around, his tone accusing. "I thought Eddie was with you." My head swung from side to side. Between sobs, the words barely eked out. "He went with Graham." Dad's face clouded with indecision. Just for a moment, had that moment lasted, it might have changed all of our futures. But Dad snapped back into control. "I still have one of you." With just 6 words, my childhood ended. As did the rest of the world. I knew what happened that night. We had been prepared. Other kids got bedtime stories about fairies and dogs. We fell asleep with visions of weapons of mass destruction dancing in our heads. Every evening, dinner included updates Dad downloaded from the internet. Updates on the U.S. involvement in the Middle East, the status of nuclear weapons programs in places like Iran and North Korea, names of countries that had been added to the list of those with WMDs. Dad gripped my shoulder and pulled me away from the silver door, twisting me around to follow the rest of my family, what was left of it. I clung to my father's hand. He rushed ahead of me, his hand dropping mine. I lifted my hand to my face and it reeked of fuel. The corridor ended. We paraded through an archway strung with twinkling white lights, then entered an enormous circular room. The place reminded me of a yurt we'd built in school, only about 80 times bigger. The curved walls were made of log beams, the same type that crisscrossed over our heads in an intricate pattern. The roundness of the room was odd yet comforting. Unlit logs sat in an elaborate stone fireplace around which luxurious overstuffed couches, love seats, and armchairs formed an audience. For a few seconds, despite the situation, my 9-year-old mind pondered what wonderful forts could be made with all those cushions. Mom sat on a green couch and cradled Therese, while Lexi stood beside them glowering. Dad lit kindling between the logs and the fireplace. The familiar smell of wood smoke wafted toward us, seeming out of place in a setting so distinctly unfamiliar. My father put his hand on my mother's shoulder. His knuckles were white. He chose that moment to tell my mother and sisters that Graham and Eddie hadn't made it. The announcement made it real, made it final, a verbal execution. Wails erupted from inside me. Mom and Lexi cried too. I ran to my mother. She held me along with Therese. Lexi leaned against Dad, and his arms encircled her. We stayed that way for a long time, my face crushed to my mom's bosom. She smelled of lilacs. As I sobbed, she stroked my hair. Like always, Mom's touch was comforting and warm. Even that night, that heinous night, her touch helped. Our cries sounded over the crackling of the logs. After a long while, sobs faded to sniffs and shudders waning from fresh grief into leftovers. Feeling the need to move, I stood up. I wiped my nose with my sleeve and climbed onto a stool by a large bar with a stainless steel refrigerator behind it. Dad flicked a switch. A plasma television dropped down from the ceiling, blank monitor glowing. I figured we'd be in here a lot. The blue from the television tinted Dad's face and blonde hair in a garish way. He startled me when he threw his arms out to the side. Cozy, yes? What do you think? It's not what I expected. Mom's voice was shaky. Dad rubbed his jaw. What did you expect? I had a pretty good idea what Mom was thinking. In third grade, I gave an oral report on nuclear war. If you lived in a target area like we did, you had approximately 40 minutes after nuclear weapons were launched. 40 minutes to do what? Say goodbye to loved ones? Stuff yourself with donuts? Take a 100-mile-an-hour joyride? Whatever one did with only 40 minutes left to live. If you were me, the son of Rex Yannicus, billionaire, those 40 minutes were spent escaping to an underground shelter built specifically for the Yannicus family. Here I would live out the next 15 years in luxurious comfort while nearly everyone else perished. We hadn't seen the shelter, only heard Dad talk about it. So I think Mom felt like I did, a little surprised the place actually existed. I don't know, Mom's head swayed slightly. The movement caused a tear to drip off the slope of her nose. At least it's quiet down here. Dad observed her for a moment, then he switched off the television. Eli, Lexi, want to see your rooms? Our grave circumstances had not yet sunk in. I was a robot, dazed, simply sliding off the stool to follow my father and my older sister. It felt like a dream. Through a doorway on the opposite side of the room from where we'd entered, we proceeded down a long carpeted hallway, similar to the ones in our house in Seattle. Only difference was this one smelled of vanilla and had the constant hum of a generator. Dad narrated as we walked. All the walls are reinforced, as we discussed, to keep out radiation. But the concrete is not pleasant to look at, so all the rooms are finished in wallboard or wood. I didn't want you to feel surrounded by concrete and steel. Dad stopped in front of a purple door. Lexi pushed it open and squealed. Leave it to her to cheer up over material possessions. Like something out of an Arabian Nights book, silk tapestries and curtains of bright colors were draped everywhere. A monstrous canopy bed ran the length of one whole wall. There was an exotic, cloying aroma. It's incense, maybe. Lexi disappeared into the closet. When Dad talked about the compound, he told us we'd have duplicates of everything we treasured. What an idiot I had been to believe everything I cherished could be reproduced. We left Lexi to explore and continued down the corridor. Dad indicated my room on the right. I pushed open the red door. Fresh-smelling, meadowy air blew softly into my face. A bed took up the entire near wall, but there was no canopy like Lexi's. Instead, I looked up at the night sky. Dad's hand squeezed my shoulder. The constellations rotate. It's time to be accurate from sundown to sunup, and will alter with the seasons. You can even choose the southern hemisphere if you like. During the day, the bulbs mimic the actual progression of the sun. Of course, you have artificial light available at any time, but I thought you might miss your sunsets. My sunsets, not just mine. I wanted to shout at him. They were Eddie's sunsets, too. Every day since we were 7, Eddie and I sat on the front lawn of the estate and watched the sun set over Puget Sound. The evening ritual began with Els, an old lady from Belgium who was one of our family's cooks. Hardly taller than Eddie and me, she wore her silver hair in a bun and squeaked around in white orthopedic shoes. As a rule, she never smiled. One evening after dinner, she set out ice cream and bowls for sundaes, then left us to make our own. Sometimes we'd make a little mess, usually just drippings on the counter, smears of chocolate sauce. But that day I dropped a scoop of ice cream on the red tiled counter. Instead of just picking it up, I poured fudge sauce over it. Eddie giggled and squirted whipped cream on top. I added a few cherries. We laughed. Then we filled our dishes. Before we were done, Els returned. She saw the chaos and must have known I had caused it. She shook her finger in my face, speaking in her strong accent. Brat, you always brat. She grabbed me by one ear. Her pinching grip was extra firm, from decades of kneading, I imagined. She had no trouble dragging me out the door. I fell to my knees on the soft lawn. My ear hurt, and I rubbed it while scowling up at her. I'm telling my dad. Els raised her hands. What will he say? He tells you always, go out, get fresh air. I give you fresh air. She slammed the door. Eddie had followed us outside with an ice cream sundae in each hand, splotches of whipped cream adorning his face. He sat down next to me and handed me a bowl. Banished to the lawn, we ate our ice cream and perceived the sunset as an actual event for the first time ever. The next day we found ourselves waiting for it to happen again. Sunsets, imitation or not, would no longer be the same. Still, knowing my dad expected it of me, I lamely thanked him for the extravagant special effects. The room was done in the primary colors that appeal to boys of 9. One wall held shelves that stretched into the stars, and a speedy scan revealed my favorite books and other possessions, copies, of course. Dad asked me if I wanted to see more of the compound. I didn't. We would have to wait 15 years before it would be safe to go outside, which left more than enough time to see the rest of the compound, our new world, a new world I would soon hate. Dad rubbed my shoulder. Suddenly his touch suffocated me. My stomach lurched and I thought I might be sick. I wriggled down away from his grip. We went back to the family room. Therese slept on the couch. When Mom saw us, she shifted Therese off her lap and stood. Her eyes were vacant as she went behind the bar and made instant hot chocolate with marshmallows in the microwave. I don't recall finishing my drink. I just remember feeling the emptiness in my gut and the guilt. Nothing would ever be the same without Eddie, but I had to live with that. Why? Because it was my fault he wasn't there. My fault Eddie was dead. That night I blamed myself. Almost 6 years later, the feeling was just as strong, as was the feeling that all was not right in our new world.